In today's episode of the Daily Brief, I'll talk about two interesting stories. I first talk about DHFL and the mystery of the missing Bandra branch, and finally, I talk about India's real estate sector. Welcome back to the Daily Brief show by Zerodha, where our aim is to simplify the biggest news in the financial markets in a way that's one level deeper as compared to news channels. I'm your host Akshara, and today is Monday, 18th August. Coming to the first story, Diwan Housing Finance Corporation Limited or DHFL was, until just a few years ago, one of India's largest housing finance companies. Over nearly 40 years, it had created an empire around providing affordable home loans to lower and middle income Indians. By the mid 2010s, it claimed to have a sprawling India wide retail network and a loan book that had crossed rupees 1 lakh crore. It was, in short, one of India's biggest financial giants. On paper, its business was identical to any housing NBFC. At one end, it would raise money from banks, mutual funds, and bond investors. At the other, it would lend that out as secured housing loans. The spread was where it earned for itself. With a portfolio of lakhs of small secured home loans, it seemed like one of the most stable variants of this business. A business that was inherently well diversified, bringing it high credit ratings and the trust of many investors and lenders. Then, in late 2018, India's financial system nearly collapsed when the financial giant IL&FS fell apart. The entire industry went into a panic as shockwaves rippled through. Banks and mutual funds started taking a cold, hard look at their exposure to NBFCs. And under the harsh light of that scrutiny, DHFL's empire suddenly looked fragile. By early 2019, investigative journalists were pointing to the possibility of a giant fraud worth tens of thousands of crores at the heart of DHFL. Investors' moods had soured. The company's stock price fell sharply while its borrowing costs spiked. Soon, DHFL was struggling to keep its head above water. In the space of a year, it had gone from being India's third largest housing finance company to one whose very survival was in question. It stopped disbursing fresh loans and began firefighting with its lenders, and those lenders asked for forensic and transaction audits. The deeper they dug, the more suspicious it all seemed. The company, it appeared, was built on a foundation of lies. At the heart of it all, it seemed, were the company's flashy promoters, the Vadhavan brothers. By late 2019, the RBI took over the company, kicking out its board and appointing an administrator in its stead. The company was forced into an insolvency process while the administrator began working to uncover what had actually happened. The information uncovered here has now become the basis of a new SEBI order against the company's erstwhile promoters and officials. A lot of this wrongdoing centered around the company's mysterious Bandra branch. DHFL's most active branch in terms of value, the branch allotted the code 001, was the one it maintained in Bandra, Mumbai. This single branch roughly made up a quarter of DHFL's loan book, disbursing an average of nearly rupees 1,000 crore a year for over a decade. It was arguably the most active home loan dispersal unit in all of India. Only, it didn't exist. This branch was a fictional creation, and it was a ghost that only existed as a logical module in DHFL's accounting systems. It ran as a parallel book of accounts housing all of the company's shady activity. It would cook up tens of thousands of fake loans out of thin air, and every month those details would be mirrored into the company's main accounting systems so that they showed up in all its company-wide reports. Most of this worked on the back of the accounting software Fox Pro through a series of custom routines. They built a disbursement distribution code which could break a single large payout into entries for thousands of small fictional home loans. And if any money came back, a collection distribution code would sprinkle it across all these fictional mini accounts. And if it didn't, a due disbursement code would top up the shortfall by booking a fresh disbursement of the pending amount so that all those fictional accounts would look like they were making payments on time. In short, the company had put together elaborate software plumbing to hide large secret payouts as affordable home loans. Now, this would link up with and consolidate into the company's main systems where they would be camouflaged among all the regular legitimate loans the company was giving out. In the years between FY 2008 and FY 2019, DHFL's Bandra branch gave out over rupees 11,000 crore in actual money as fictional home loans, all masked through this sophisticated system. When you added all the fake entries the system masked, DHFL books showed nearly rupees 22,000 crore in disbursements from the branch. It also recorded nearly rupees 11,000 crore in supposed interest income. And this was all, of course, a mirage. But What was it hiding? Where was all that money going? SEBI found 87 different entities, which it called the Bandra Book entities or BBEs, that were at the other end of these transactions. Many of them had no assets, no revenues, and a negative net worth, and yet they were loaned hundreds of crores. At least 83 of them, as far as SEBI could tell, were linked to the Vadhavan brothers and their relatives. Naturally, none of those loans went through the standard underwriting and KYC processes. Instead, the company built a parallel flow for the Bandra branch loans. Whenever one of those BBEs would write to the company asking for funds, it would be forwarded to the company's chairman and managing director, Kapil Vadhavan. And he would simply respond with approved. Instantly, the company's accounts department would make that money available for disbursal. And this all happened with no checks, no collateral, no oversight, nothing. Now, a lot of this money would make its way back to the promoters. From the data available to it, SEBI was able to trace at least approximately rupees 2,250 crore going into other companies that were connected to DHFL's promoters and officials. In the back end, the company's systems would chop these into tiny retail home loans and start recording regular payments into those accounts, whether any money came in or not. And this made the company's books look artificially good. After all, at least a quarter of its supposed loan book looked pristine, with all payments coming in on time like clockwork. And those fraudulent transactions, ironically, improved how DHFL's published financials looked, helped DHFL raise more money, and let it justify AAA ratings. Now, there are some other tangents here that we aren't going into, including a late attempt in 2019 to clean up the Bandra branch's debt. For that, we recommend diving into SEBI's order. A lot of what we have described so far was the gross mismanagement of an NBFC. That's the domain of the RBI, and indeed, it was the RBI that first took charge of the matter. But SEBI also read it as a violation of securities law. See, DHFL was a listed company. Both its shares and its debt were publicly listed. It was therefore bound by the high standard of conduct that binds any listed company. It had a duty to be truthful in its dealings and give an honest account of itself in its financial statements. It was also required to clearly tell its investors of any related parties that it was transacting with. Any investor that put their money in the company, either its shares or its listed debt, was basing their investments on the company's own public statements. But not only was the company not forthcoming about its problems, it set up an entire system to manufacture transactions and avoid oversight. There couldn't be a more obvious violation of those duties. When the RBI had taken the company off its promoters' hands 5 years ago, it was trying to correct the mismanagement of an NBFC. SEBI this time around was going after the company's promoters and officials, essentially for duping investors. For this, it slapped them with a penalty of rupees 120 crore. The Vadhavan brothers, as the masterminds of the scheme, will have to cough up the largest share, rupees 27 crore each. The rest is distributed among the company's other directors and executives. All of them have also been ordered not to approach the public markets in any way, including as a director or executive of any entity that has anything to do with the markets. We know this seems rather small, given the scale of the operation, but do remember that this is only the direct penalty. SEBI will now separately try to quantify the illegal gains they've made from the markets, after which it'll ask them to disgorge all of that as well. The Bandra branch story is, at its core, a reminder of just how banal financial deceit can be. We've covered many SEBI orders on the Daily Brief where fly-by-night operators play with public greed to net a few crores. But this one of the biggest we've covered so far, wasn't a single dramatic rug pull. Instead, it was something altogether more boring. The quiet, relentless churning of a software-based accounting machine that was built to relabel reality. The company's large, risky payouts, once they went through this funnel, came out as an immaculate portfolio of tiny, punctual home loans, and all of them sat in the company's published financials right before the public eye for over a decade. On paper, DHFL looked like one of the safest businesses in Indian finance, but it was all just a shell game. To SEBI, episodes like this can call the integrity of our public markets into question. If a listed company can lie in its fundamentals for so long and use those falsehoods to raise so much capital, who can trust where their money is going anymore? And that's the very basis of SEBI's order. The Bandra branch may have been a ghost in the system, but it casts a solid shadow over India's financial markets. Coming to the second story, recently we went through the basics of the residential real estate business and everything that matters to a developer's financial health. Now we're putting that knowledge to work. We're looking through the Q1 FY26 results of the residential arms of three listed real estate giants, DLF, Godrej Properties, and Shobha. All three on the surface do the same thing, building and selling homes across India. But scratch beneath that, and you see three very different ways of going about that work. Through these results, we'll see how those differences result in different outcomes and how they create different vulnerabilities. The three companies we're looking at today all have very different business models. DLF, which is the oldest of the three, has been around for 8 decades. It was founded a year before India got its independence, in fact. Over those long years, they accumulated vast land holdings, most of them right outside Delhi in today's Gurgaon, but some in other parts of North India and major metro cities. Back then, those land banks would have cost a fraction of today's rates. As those cities grew, their land holdings turned into prime property. Some of that was their own doing. They practically created early Gurgaon, for instance. For years, they dominated the real estate market of NCR. But recently, they've started looking outside their comfort zone. They just made their first serious move into Mumbai and are looking to expand in Goa as well. Godrej Properties went for a different route. Instead of straight up purchasing land, they decided to create a network of partnerships. They make deals with landowners offering to develop their property in exchange for a share of the profits. This capital light model lets them expand rapidly across multiple cities. In every city they enter, local partners bring land and local knowledge. Godrej just brings brand, execution, and marketing expertise. This lets them move quickly without the massive upfront investments that traditional developers require. Shobha, meanwhile, chose a do it yourself path. They don't just develop properties, they make tiles and fixtures, train their own crews, construct everything in house, and generally control every step of the process. And this gives them complete control over quality, bringing them a lot of trust. At the same time, it's harder and more expensive for them to expand. They started in South India but are slowly moving north. Last quarter, though, NCR contributed to 57% of total sales. All three are making different bets about what matters the most in real estate, and the quarter gone by is a single snapshot into how those bets might play out. As we noted in our primer, one of the most important sources of money for any real estate developer comes from pre-sales, when people pay to book an apartment before it's built. This is where all their strategy and marketing meets actual wallets. DLF absolutely crushed the pre-sales game this quarter with bookings of rupees 11,425 crore, a staggering 78% jump from last year. Most of these were for high-end luxury apartments in the heart of Gurgaon, each of which sold for rupees 7 crore or more. A single project, Privana North Phase 3, accounted for 96% of those bookings. Godrej Properties brought in rupees 7,082 crore in bookings. That was 18% below last year, but still marked the 8th consecutive quarter that they crossed rupees 5,000 crore. The decline highlights a fundamental reality of this business. Real estate is fundamentally lumpy. Unlike many other sectors, real estate companies don't have a consistent stream of revenue, and everything revolves around how many projects you're ready to launch. Shobha, meanwhile, raked in rupees 2,079 crore in pre-sales, 11% over last year. And this was a record quarter for the company as it crossed rupees 2,000 crore in quarterly sales for the first time. Dig one layer deeper though, and it seems like the average price per square foot dropped 10%. So, is that a reason for panic? We aren't sure. In Q1 last year, almost half of Shobha's sales came from expensive homes worth more than rupees 5 crore. This year, the biggest sales chunk came from cheaper rupees 2 to 3 crore homes. And if you have launched cheaper projects in a quarter, your average price naturally drops. But that doesn't in itself tell you much about the company's prospect. At the end of the day, pre-sales numbers are a marketing victory. It's when you make collections that those actually become cash in hand. That conversion isn't automatic. In real estate, customers don't pay everything upfront. They typically pay up in installments that are tied to construction milestones. The rate at which you can do so is your collection efficiency, which is the share of a quarter's sales that you actually collect in the same period. It's shaped by many factors: the terms you set, the progress you've made on projects, prevailing market conditions, and a lot more. Together, these determine how much cash you actually have at your disposal. In contrast to its impressive pre-sales figures, DLF actually collected just rupees 2,794 this quarter, a collection efficiency of roughly 24%. That's exceptionally low. Ordinarily, such low figures would be a red flag, but there's some nuance here. Almost all of DLF's fantastic pre-sales came from a brand new launch. The launch received a blockbuster response, but customers have probably actually just paid their initial down payment so far. The company also ran into some weather-related delays and didn't send out demands to its customers, and that will probably sort itself out soon. According to DLF's management, where they did ask for money, 80 to 90% of that money came in. So its poor collections may be a mix of timing, a bumper response to a new project, and bad weather. Godrej Properties achieved a healthier but not spectacular 52% collection efficiency this quarter, collecting rupees 3,670 crore against their sales. That said, the company supposedly receives approximately 94% of payments within a month of sending out an invoice, indicating that their collection process at least is fairly healthy. Shobha, in contrast, achieved the highest collection efficiency of the three at 77%, raking in rupees 1,599 crore. The company has a range of projects that are at different points in their life cycle, and its collections give it a steady inflow of money to complete them. Ultimately, though, what people are paying a developer for is execution. While pre-sales and collections tell you how well prepared a company may be for future projects, its execution track record actually gives you a picture of how well it comes through on its past promises. DLF had some good news on this front. It managed to get occupancy certificates for major residential projects like OMT Delhi or Garden City Enclave in Gurgaon. After years, those customers are finally getting the keys to their apartments, and the revenue cycle for those projects shall come to an end. But not everyone had the same luck. As we noted in our primer, bringing a project to the finish line can be a real nightmare. Take Shobha. It had 5 projects in Bengaluru that were completely built and ready to hand over. Only they couldn't get occupancy certificates. All that revenue was stalled, and that was a big hit for the company, as we'll soon see. Godrej didn't talk about completions this quarter, but their cost of construction spending increased to over rupees 1,170 crore in the quarter. And that means there's probably a lot more construction activity within the company. What that's resulted in, however, we have no insight into. With that out of the way, let's turn to the bottom line. DLF's gross margins took a hit this quarter, dropping to 39%. This wasn't because they suddenly got bad at construction, of course. It's just that quarterly profits and losses can be convoluted in this industry. This quarter, the company finished off lower margin projects which dragged down their figures. DLF also has a rental business which makes assessing profits a little confusing. But that's outside the scope of what we're discussing here. Godrej did better, with gross margins of 58% and an impressive PAT margin of 37.5%. That's well above the industry standard. And it's also an illustration of how this asset-light business model works. One of the biggest expenses for a real estate company is to amass land. And that's something Godrej skips entirely, working with landowners instead of buying that land. That makes for better margins, although its rivals make better gains over the lifetime of a project. Shobha, in contrast, faced the quarter's biggest margin challenge. EBITDA margins collapsed to just 8.1% and PAT margins at a mere 1.5%. Because those 5 projects in Bangalore were stuck, the rupees 650 crore in revenue and the rupees 150 crore in PAT that should have shown up this quarter just didn't. Meanwhile, its expenses keep ticking. And here's what its management said. Now, this is an illustration of the perils of Shobha's approach. Ordinarily, their vertical integration gives them a lot of control over quality and timelines since they aren't juggling multiple contractors. On the other hand, when something goes wrong, even something outside their control, it hits them harder. Their attention and therefore their risk is concentrated in a small set of projects. Others who manage a range of projects through an army of subcontractors are more diversified. To a real estate company, though, profits and margins are arguably less important than cash. See, there's a lot of complexity in how a real estate company recognizes revenue. Often, profits on paper don't translate to money in the bank. A company might show impressive profits and be cash starved. It might report weak earnings while sitting on piles of money. And that's why it helps to look at operating cash flows, which is the money that companies actually have available to fund their next round of land acquisitions and construction. This quarter, all 3 companies had a net positive operating cash flow. That is, all 3 collected more money than they spent on their business. Their debt levels were also manageable. Put the two together, and all 3 companies have enough financial firepower to keep funding their projects. DLF, for instance, generated rupees 1,420 crore in extra cash. Godrej achieved rupees 947 crore, although that's down 4% from last year. Shobha generated rupees 395 crore, up 22% from last year, which means that their poor profits didn't hurt the actual money they have in hand. Now, this is the sweet spot for any developer. If you can constantly spin off more cash than you spend, you can keep constructing more. So, what's ahead? You can think of a real estate company as an unending capex machine. Unlike the average company that might announce expansions once in a while, a real estate company's upcoming projects is everything. And those plans are not an indication of upcoming capacity, but their main product. Even the most successful real estate company could die if it doesn't have new projects ready to launch over the next 2 to 3 years. DLF has perhaps the strongest pipeline visibility. It's coming up with 37 million square feet, potentially worth rupees 1,14,500 crore. Their massive land bank gives them decades worth of opportunities ahead, and they plan to use this to launch more luxury and super luxury properties. Godrej Properties added 5 projects worth rupees 11,400 crore in potential future sales, more than half their annual business development target achieved in just 3 months. Roba has 17.67 million square feet lined up across 17 projects, with plans to launch 6 to 8 million square feet in the next 9 months. But at the end of the day, having a pipeline is one thing. But turning those plans into actual apartment keys in customers' hands is where the real test begins. Only time will tell whether this potential will turn into successful launches without delays. Now, coming to the tidbits. After losing some Axis and ICICI Lounge programs, Dreamfolks is shifting gears. The travel and lifestyle aggregator is now eyeing fast growth in non lounge services, from golf and members only clubs to dining, spa, wellness, and even social club access, while expanding into Southeast Asia and the Middle East. Now, coming to the next tidbit. Just a month after temporarily banning the US based Jane Street for index manipulation, SEBI has proposed to formally bring algorithmic trading and proprietary trading under its master regulations. The draft also suggests removing the outdated definition of small investor, citing SEBI data that 91% of retail traders lost Rs 52.4 thousand crore in derivatives in 2024. Now, coming to the next tidbit. In a step forward for the nuclear sector, India plans to lift its state monopoly on uranium by allowing private companies to mine, import, and process the fuel. This landmark move, key to tripling nuclear power capacity by 2047, retains state control over spent fuel reprocessing and plutonium management. Now, coming to the final tidbit. S&P Global has upgraded India's long-term sovereign credit rating from BBB- to BBB, citing the country's strong economic resilience and steady fiscal consolidation, and has maintained a stable outlook. The move reflects enhanced investor confidence in India's macroeconomic fundamentals and fiscal discipline. That's all the news I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.
Disclaimer: this content is for informational purposes only. None of the stocks, brands, or products mentioned are recommendations or endorsements.